Some of your favorite actors have used Backstage to kickstart their career. Denzel Washington, Al Pacino, Viola Davis, Chris Evans, that's Captain America. All you have to do to be just like Captain America is go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code ENVELOPE at checkout for a 30-day free trial. That's 30 days of access to thousands of casting notices uploaded daily. Subscribe to Backstage today, and again, use code ENVELOPE at checkout, ENVELOPE, for free.
I think the challenge for me as an actor has always been, how can I make this more personal? Whether it's Star Wars or Venom or Sound of Metal, how can I try and create from a more personal place? And I think actually after Mogul Mowgli and Sound of Metal, that was a period of time directly after I'd done a bunch of bigger stuff. It was a real deliberate attempt to say, like, I want my work to remain personal. And I want to be bringing my personal experiences to the table in a really vulnerable way.
Hello and welcome to another new episode of In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast, where the biggest names in film, television, and theater offer acting lessons and behind-the-scenes insights you won't find anywhere else. I am your host, Backstage Senior Editor Vinnie Mancuso, and joining me today is one of the most dynamic leading men of the last decade plus, the wonderful Riz Ahmed. An actor, rapper, and graduate of the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, Riz, of course, first broke out to wider audiences thanks to a supporting role next to Jake Gyllenhaal in Nightcrawler, followed up shortly after with his Emmy-winning turn in HBO's The Night Of. Since then, he has juggled blockbusters like Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and Venom, and starring in indies like Mogul Mowgli and Sound of Metal, the latter of which earned him an Oscar nomination. Everything he has been building as an actor and public figure comes to a head with Bait, the Prime Video series he created and stars in, which just earned him his third Emmy nomination. Riz, of course, plays Shah Latif, an actor who tumbles into a full-blown existential crisis after he's photographed leaving an audition to play the next James Bond. We use that concept as a springboard to discuss being vulnerable in your art and trying to bridge the gap between who you are and who the public wants you to be. We also talked a bit about Riz's role in Digger, the still kind of mysterious Tom Cruise comedy from Alejandro Inarritu, which he has not had a chance to talk about a whole lot. It's just a great, great chat. Let's get right into it. Here is Riz Ahmed. Riz, how's it going?
Going well, man. I'm excited to be on this podcast. I listen to it a lot.
Oh, I really appreciate that. We're massive fans of what you do here. I was just reading your Backstage cover story from 2021. You're a Backstage regular. We love anytime we get to talk to you. But before that, like, where are you right now? Where in the world are you currently?
You know, get up from the character for Beige Curtains. I'm in Malaysia right now shooting a film.
I love that. That's 12 hours, 12-hour difference between us.
To New York, it is 12 hours, yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. I hadn't been before. I always wanted to, and I'm so lucky to spend some time here. People, the food, the culture is incredible.
Absolutely. We don't have a ton of time here, so I'll just sort of launch right into this conversation. I watched Bait. Congratulations on all things Bait. The Emmy nomination, well deserved, but just the response to it has been incredible. So first of all, congrats on that.
Thank you.
Just watching it, what strikes me the most about it is the vulnerability of putting the show out there, of the character, of what the show is saying. So I just want to ask, when you look back on your career, how important being vulnerable has been, and whether that has been something you've had to learn over time.
That's such a great question, man. Yes, I think being vulnerable has been the most important thing. So much of being an actor forces you to be vulnerable. You're often placed in a position of being vulnerable. You have so little control, and things can be so unpredictable that inherently can make you feel vulnerable. And we can lose ourselves by trying to run away from that feeling and escape it rather than lean into it. And leaning into it can, is our superpower as actors. It hurts, to go there, but it's what it's all about in the end. And this certainly was the most vulnerable, most personal, most scary kind of thing I've ever made, to the extent where I think after I'd made it, I genuinely was panicking about maybe we can just not put it out now. How do I make sure? I'm not sure I want people to see it. It could have all kind of backfired and gone wrong in so many different levels. It's so I'm so grateful to be kind of having this conversation with you now, and for the show to be kind of something that people are talking about. But it is something I also had to learn. In many ways, I think the bait is a culmination of a journey of trying to embrace my vulnerability more and more. I think with films like Sound of Metal and Mogul Mowgli, they really kind of like taught me and pushed me to try and create from a more personal place. And of course, bait couldn't be any more personal. It's like, the panic attack at the end of episode 1 is a panic attack that I had on that specific stage in London at the Kentish Town Forum. Being jumped in episode 3 on that staircase in that park as a kid happened to me in that park behind my mum's house, the sweet shop and Eid. It's just so super specific and personal and as you say, vulnerable, that I kind of wanted to almost see how far I could kind of push in that direction. And it was scary, and it's something that I think I have to continually remind myself to put the guard down and go to that place.
Well, it's always so interesting to me because I've been doing this specific job for a long time, and I've had all different kinds of conversations with actors, and so I'm always curious, just to to put it bluntly, like when I think about being vulnerable, this is part of it. I'm always curious about like how much conversations like these are like an extension of who you are as an actor. Like, like where does sort of like putting yourself out there beyond the work fit in? And is there a sort of reluctance to, like, I want to put that in the work, I want to put that in the conversation? Like, where does this aspect of the career fit into the vulnerability?
It's a really great question. I kind of think it's both. I kind of think that having conversations about the work has always been to me something that I've felt is an important part of it, not necessarily because I want to kind of impose a framing on the work for people or a meaning on it, but because often, it's a space where you can kind of have important conversations and kind of add depth to certain things. I've kind of felt like, in a way, it's an important extension of the work. If you hope that your work creates conversation, then I'd like to try and help that to happen. You just don't want to be the leading voice in that conversation. You know what I mean? You want to be the only person talking about what you're doing, and you don't want to force people to think a certain thing about it. But I think I would hope that, some of the work I do like strikes a nerve or presses buttons or is provocative in a way that does create conversation. And so I want to open a space for that, if you know what I mean. On the other hand, though, it's like the best work you do is when you're like not self-conscious, and there's nothing more self-conscious than looking at a mini video of yourself on Zoom in real time as you're talking about your acting.
I know that feeling very well.
You know what I mean? It's like the most self-conscious thing you can do, which is the opposite of where we like to be as actors, where we're flowing and you forget yourself.
Well, I mean, just hearing you say that, it makes me think of, what the attention means, stuff like that. You are now another Emmy nominee for this. You've won an Emmy. You've won an Oscar for a short film. You've been Oscar nominated. You've been through the awards process. And I'm always curious to ask, because it's different for everyone, what the reality is of like the award recognition, like what it has actually done each time for what comes next, what is actually added versus like, because there's always that sort of reality versus public perception thing.
So yes, that's such an interesting question. I think for answer in two parts, one is like the reality of it for your career, and the other one is like the reality of it as an experience. As an experience, it's kind of like any drug in a way. There's like a rush of dopamine and like adrenaline and disbelief, and it's like you're in a candy store, and like any rush, it dissipates. And I think I've realized that the thing that I'm chasing is less these destinations and less these kind of like things you can point at and these, or an accolade and this. I realized that like, the reason it feels good is because for a moment it gives you the feeling that you get when you're really in a scene. That actually the thing we're chasing is that experience of being very, as I said, unself-conscious and flowing and part of something bigger than you. And I think it's like, I've kind of realized as I've had like been lucky enough to have these moments of like these rushes and then dissipate, you kind of go, oh, like the thing we're chasing is actually the feeling of doing it more than anything else, you know? But then yet, like this takes place in an industry and an industry of our peers, and to have the recognition of your peers, to have the support of your peers is so meaningful, man. Like I've always, you know, there's a special kind of love that comes from your peers, you know, who do the thing that you're doing. And if you have their admiration or support, that is so meaningful. What it does for like career, I think that's a bit of a crapshoot. I think it's like a bit of a roulette wheel. I would like to think that it's necessarily like makes things more certain, or the A goes to B, that goes to C. I think that's just not the nature of this kind of randomized number generator that is, you know, an acting career. I think it's quite, it could, you know, do all kinds of things. It could do pretty much bring your career back to exactly where it was the day before. So I think it's expecting it to like change your life, change who you are, change your career. I think that's misguided. It being a moment of massive encouragement from your like peers, that's meaningful. I think that's stayed with me in ways when I felt down or really insecure or doubtful, you know, my ability to go, okay, well, look, some other people who do this think you did good at least once, you know, like that's meaningful. So yeah, I don't know if that's a bit of a rambling answer. But.
No, I mean, like it all kind of comes down to like everything in an acting career. It's a bit of crapshoot. It kind of very much depends on that very specific situation, because it's always going to be different. I mean, just literally just hearing you say that, it kind of, something I love about Bait, you know, it speaks to a lot of things, but one thing it speaks to is sort of how roles of that size, projects of that size, are truly like a different world. Like that's a like compared to sort of making an indie film or something like that. You have done both. You know, you've been on Venom, you've been on Rogue One, the sort of like massive blockbuster type things, and you've been on indie, Sound of Metal, real life stuff like that. For people that are like not in the industry, it's hard to understand like what the massive difference between those two things are. You know, they just understand big budget, small budget. So for you, what is like the actual tangible difference between those two types of sets? And like more importantly, how does that difference affect you as the actor, you know, on that set?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, you know, that kind of feeling of like you're doing the school play or something, or like we're just this merry troop, like we merry few, we're like all hands on deck. I think you're more likely to get that kind of camaraderie and sense of ownership across the board in a smaller set. It's also can be highly stressful because of the lack of resources or time that you have. On a bigger set, and you know, there's more people, and that can sometimes mean you get to focus more on just doing your own thing, but it can also mean that sometimes it can, there's a danger of it feeling impersonal. I think the challenge for me as an actor has always been, really for anything I do, is that how can I make this more personal? Whether it's Star Wars or Venom or Sound of Metal, how can I try and create from a more personal place? And I think actually after Mogul Mowgli and Sound of Metal, that was a period of time directly after I'd done a bunch of bigger stuff like Venom and Rogue One. And it was a real deliberate attempt to say, like, I want my work to remain personal. You know, I want to be bringing my personal experiences to the table in a really, like we were talking about before, vulnerable way. And in many ways, Bait is a culmination of that journey. You know, it's a culmination of a desire to try and make things as personal as possible, because I believe that that's what people connect to. And the scary as it is kind of doing it, it's all the more gratifying for a show like this to be, you know, talked about and recognized when it is more personal. You know, it's very much a kind of bit of an underdog show in the grand scheme of things, and what's out there in TV and other things that are nominated. It's, you know, it's like multilingual, genre bending, and it's just James Bond comedy. It's kind of like quirky. It doesn't quite fit in anywhere. And so I guess that scrappy underdog feeling is both the gift and the curse of those smaller indie sets. But I've always loved that. And just certainly the feeling we had on Bait, you know.
Something I find so interesting is before these conversations, I read. And what I love to read is what other people say about the person I'm interviewing. And something I came across many people saying about you, almost word for word, is he takes his work seriously, which sounds very straightforward, but I'm curious, when you hear that, like, what has taking the work seriously meant for you?
Yeah, I like to think, I think it's maybe an old British actor's kind of like saying, which is like, take the work seriously, but do not take yourself seriously. And I think I think Bait is a really good example of that, right? It's really a lot of kind of self-mockery and, ripping into myself, or in a way that's hopefully more enjoyable for people watching than it is for me. But I kind of feel like taking the work seriously, I think, for me, more and more means putting your heart into it. But it's so easy because it can be exhausting, because it can be intense, because you can sometimes, it is a job. Don't get me wrong, it's a job like any other. But I just feel like trying to make it a place where you can go somewhere that you wouldn't normally, trying to kind of like push yourself to go to a place you haven't been before, trying to give other people permission to feel things that are complicated or ugly or messy. I think that's what it means to me. I think taking work seriously to me means taking seriously how powerful this medium is of storytelling. Understanding that, like, when you share your pain or insecurity or craziness or messiness, it's healing for someone else to see that. You know what I mean? That if they feel less alone with that, it's to like never forget how powerful that can be. And so, yeah, I think it's about that. It's just trying to honor and respect the kind of this craft, and just, how much it can move us is just something that I'm always in awe of, and I just find so mysterious and almost spiritual.
It's just such a full circle thing. You said that the old British adage is take the work seriously, not yourself. And I think somebody who said that directly to us, word for word, was Daniel Craig, who really believed in that. James Bond himself, that was his sort of guiding ethos. This show, you said many times, it's not about James Bond. It's not. It's about so much more. I do just want to sort of ask you, though. You have been sort of linked to that role. You've said it before, and I don't really want to ask about that so much as I want to just ask about what the experience is like because it's one of those like weirdly specific thing about being an actor is like seeing your name linked to something and you might not know where that came from or like why you're linked to that thing. And I'm just sort of curious like what that experience is like.
It's like a weird glimpse into what some people might think of you. That's weird.
It's interesting.
That's weird in its own way, right? Like, oh, do I come across like that? Am I that? Oh, I could be that. Does this person think I'm that? Do I think I could be that? Actually, I don't think I'm good enough to be. Actually, maybe I could be. Wait, who am I? What am I? Like, to lose yourself in other people's projections onto you is what this show is about. And that's what can so easily happen to us as artists, as actors, as storytellers. And actually, all of us, to be honest, now in a social media age, everyone has a public persona and a private persona. And so I think it can be like really distracting, basically, and like kind of like intriguing and confusing and exciting and heartbreaking. You know what I mean? It's just like opening your window to like what strangers might project onto you. And, it can be a real rabbit hole. And that's what, I try and explore in the show, is like someone who's really concerned about how they're seen, who wants to become this archetypal symbol of success and alpha masculinity and Britishness, and because he believes he's not good enough really as who he is. So yeah, I think it can be like the start of a kind of bit of a wormhole and a rabbit hole. At least sometimes it has been for me.
I must say that this show's not about James Bond, but there is the moment in episode 5 where you sort of you get to play the alter ego, and you do have a really incredible James Bond run. Like there's this moment where you're sort of chasing yourself, and I really, it's such a great acting thing of you differentiated the way that Shaw runs and the way that you run as James Bond. I'm curious about that, the physicality of like working out the James Bond run.
I was inspired by the T-1000 run in Terminator 2.
It's the straight arms.
Straight arms. Yeah. Because I wanted it to be something kind of slightly soulless and mechanical and robotic about this kind of like symbolic avatar of like badassness, as opposed to the like wobbly, wiggly kind of like human being who's just running to save his ass, So yeah, that was a thought. Also, those stiff shoes, like you kind of have to run very straight lines, bro. You can't be like mixing it up. There's no pirouettes in those dress shoes.
I love that. As we sort of, a very limited time here, and I do want to just sort of ask about something that I'm very, very excited about, is that the trailer for Digger recently came out. Your sort of next project with, Tom Cruise, Sandra Hüller, this project that people know very little about. I think we still know very little about. I'm curious about what your experience was like on that film. And, again, I'm curious about what each thing adds to the career, whether that's an award or anything like that. So I'm curious about what this project, Digger, added to your experience, who you are as an actor.
Yeah, sure. So the weird thing is that Bait and Digger overlapped. I was doing them at the same time. So I was kind of doing my last day shooting Bait was my first day, got in a car and went straight to Digger. And what's interesting is I think inevitably things rub off on you, right? And I think just working with Alejandro and Tom and Chivo and all these amazing actors, and particularly Alejandro's vision is just so specifically singular and bold. It kind of made it, what it gave me is a kind of confidence and dared me to try and be as bold as possible as we were editing and cutting and creating the soundscape and scripting the reshoots and everything for Bait. Those two things overlapped completely. The entire post process and the entire shoot of Digger, they were happening concurrently, and some days I'd be doing both. And I think what it gave to me in my process is like, it reminded me like just how exciting it is to be kind of unapologetic and bold. That's what Alejandro is. That's what his vision is. That's what the experience was of working with him. And so I just tried to really bring that into our post process, really trying to empower our editors to be as bold as possible, our music supervisors, our sound design, and everything to just try and really create something fresh, and that's the kind of the inspiration I think that I took from that process.
Well, as we sort of come to the end of our time here, I just want to ask very quickly, because something that Bait is, at its core about is that question of who do I want to be, whether that means, as an actor, as a person. I'm sure that's something that you face as an actor, is like, what kind of actor do I want to be? So I guess the question is like, has that changed for you, obviously? And does that question ever go away in your experience?
I think first and foremost, it doesn't sound too like basic to say it. It's just, I'd love to continue being a working one. I don't take it lightly. It's a tremendous privilege to get to do this work. And I guess the things that I've become, that have always been important to me in a way, is to continually be able to stretch myself and kinds of roles I'm doing, or the kind of genres I'm playing in, or whether it's something like Bait where I'm kind of show running it as well and playing a character that's very close to myself, and how that feels difficult in a different way, or scary in a different way. It's just I hope to be able to continually push myself and find ways of stretching myself, because I've always found that my work is best and most enjoyable and when I'm least in control of it, when you're part of something else, when you're just kind of open in faith to something happening because it's kind of beyond you. It's when it's slightly scary, that I think interesting things happen. So I hope to just keep pushing myself, I
love that. Well, Riz, we can speak anytime, but for now, this was so lovely. I'm sure we'll talk again down the road.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage. Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.